So you've probably heard a lot about AI and you're wondering what's it all about. We may use the shorthand AI, but what we're really talking about mostly today is generative AI. That's what's got everyone so excited because it generates new content. AI before could predict content, could predict numbers, outcomes, things like that, but it wasn't generating complete sentences, paragraphs, white papers, audio, video in a way that was almost human-like, in a way that could simulate the way that people would interact. And that's what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. Raj has a lengthy experience with artificial intelligence, including before the generative AI boom. He worked with the Army on predictive analytics. He was, before that, a number of jobs, but he was a PhD in machine learning from MIT, and most recently was head of card strategy at Capital One, which was a lot of their AI strategy. So he's going to walk you through a brief overview of how AI, generative AI, works, how it doesn't work and can't be expected to work, and then I'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of the risks that people and organizations open themselves up to when they don't understand its limitations.
First of all, good afternoon. Thank you all for inviting us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Normally, we would have a much longer introduction before that last slide, where we would talk about the applications of AI and where you're starting to see it. But in the interest of time, we're kind of skipping to the what is it, what do you need to know about it, and what should you be worried about it. You've been seeing AI all over the place, whether or not you know it. Certainly, many of you have seen it mentioned in the news media pretty frequently in the context of things like ChatGPT and systems you can interact with. Where you've been running into it that you might not realize you're running into are places like Amazon. When you go to their website, you're interacting with models in the background that are figuring out what to show you on that page. Because as you probably noticed, every page is kind of customized not only for you when you go there, but for that moment in time. And it changes the next time you visit it. Every time you interact nowadays with any kind of chatbot on a company website, it's likely got some level of AI running behind it. But so I'm going to start with just very quickly to say all of the attention about AI you're hearing about these days, even though it seems very new, AI has been in the works for a long, long time. So it really started back in the 50s with the very earliest research. But there were two kind of big leaps that brought us to where we are today. The first one was around the early 2000s, when we moved into a realm where we could compute much faster and also handle a lot more data. And that happened because of two things. One is we started moving to the cloud and having access to a lot more information and a lot more processing. But also people figured out that these things called GPUs, these graphical processing units that were invented for video games, interestingly enough, worked really, really, really well on the systems that power artificial intelligence. And so all of a sudden, researchers could do a lot more with this technology. Then a few years ago, around 2018, Google researchers came up with a whole new architecture of what's called neural nets, the systems that power AI, that enabled them to understand context. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's really what suddenly led to the explosion you see now, where we have kind of a new invention in AI almost every week at this point. One thing I will say is that even though AI has exploded in the last few years, there's been machine learning for a long, long time. And machine learning is basically the idea that you have these kinds of mathematical models where you can give them a bunch of data and they'll train on that data and learn how to do something with that data. And these models have been around forever. They're in everything you interact with on the web. They're in every kind of company you can imagine. So when you go to the grocery store, they have machine learning models that tell them what to put on the shelves based on predicted demand and what's selling. When you use your little loyalty card to check out. There's a machine learning model that's figuring out what you're spending your money on and using that to give you deals the next time you shop. These things are everywhere. That even on Amazon, when you go on the website and you get the little thing that says customers like you often buy these items, that's a machine learning model in the background that's looking at millions of customers and basically coming up with little comparisons around, who are you most like in your shopping habits and what have they bought in the last week, and showing you those things. It's all being done with machine learning. So the first thing is traditional machine learning handles only numbers, basically. It crunches numbers. And it does that for one particular task. So I could build a model using traditional machine learning that would allow me to make a prediction. Let's say I want to predict who's going to respond to a marketing mailer, or I want to predict the risk level of a particular customer applying for a credit card. So it handles numbers. It can do one thing. It's really good at doing that one thing, but it can't do anything else. The big difference when you get to what's now called generative AI from that perspective is it can handle not only numbers, but text and images as well. And the same model can do many different tasks. And you can see this with something like ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT to find you information. You can ask it to summarize a document. You can ask it to write a document or a letter or a resume or whatever you want. It can do all of those things in the same model. The other big difference is that the traditional machine learning models can only operate with the data they've got. So if I want to make a prediction, it can make a prediction around things it's already seen. If you ask it to predict something it hasn't seen before, you're going to get a garbage answer. Generative AI is actually capable of going beyond its training data and creating new content, entirely new content. You've probably seen this in the media a little bit, where someone will ask the AI to generate a weird picture, or you could ask it to, rewrite a Taylor Swift song in the style of Shakespeare or something like that. And it can do a pretty good job of this, even though it's never seen that before. At least I'm pretty sure it's probably never seen that before. So it is actually creating new things and going beyond its training data. And that is kind of the magic of it. In particular, I'm going to talk about the systems that handle text and language, which are called large language models. So most of the models you've probably heard about in the media, things like ChatGPT, Claude, Llama, if you've ever heard of any of these models, they are all large language models. And the way they work is basically by trying to predict the next word in a phrase or a sentence. So you can imagine that your brain does this automatically. So if I were to say, hi, my name is Raj, it's nice to, your brain's going to start filling in what I didn't say, right? Probably it's going to come up with meat is the likely next word. But it's going to automatically do that. So the way these models work is pretty much the same. So let's say you typed in that phrase. It would start trying to figure out what the next word is. And the way it would do that is it's seen billions of sentences, right? The current generation of models have effectively been trained on the entire open internet. They've seen everything in the English language internet. So the first thing it does is it looks for all the word relationships that come after the word to. So what comes after to? Well, there's a bunch of things. It could be the word meat, it could be the word be, it could be, but there's also a bunch of things it's not. And it knows it's not probably the word cow or ship and things like that. So it's not probability exactly, but you could think of it like probability. So it's going to figure out the probability of the next word. But it could be very easily wrong because there's a lot of things that come after the word too. So the magic of the transformer, that architecture that Google created a few years ago, is the transformer actually lets the system look at the entire sentence.
So it not only looks at the word to, it looks at the word before that. It also looks all the way back at the beginning of the sentence where I said, hi, my name is. And it uses all of that information together to figure out the likelihood of the most likely next word. And so it comes up with the word meet, and then it starts again and it says, okay, it's nice to meet. What comes next? It goes through the same process again. And at some point, it will decide that it's at the end of the sentence and the next word is a period. And then it starts over. So it creates these very, very plausible and coherent sentences for you based on likelihoods, based on things it has seen. And it can do this with facts and information because, you know, it's got lots of repositories. So if it sees that you're asking it a question about a certain subject, it is prioritizing as it's figuring out its likelihoods, anything that related to that subject in all of the billions of pieces of information it's seen. Now, the danger here is that it's not thinking, it's not doing any kind of evaluation. It is only doing likelihood and probabilities of what happens next. And so this is where you get into what's called commonly hallucinations, where these models can create completely incorrect information. They can make things up. In some cases, they'll make up sources of information that don't really exist. And it sounds plausible. And so it becomes very dangerous because it creates a really nice sounding set of facts that aren't actually facts because it doesn't know they're facts. And that's a key piece to understand. So at that point, I'm going to transition it to Cameron, who I guess didn't really introduce himself, but Cameron has a background in law, among other things, and has been specializing in understanding the risks associated with AI and the challenges that companies and regular users need to think about as you're using those systems.
The risks really come up, I guess, in a couple of ways. One is what you put into the system. That's often called a prompt. And you can put things in there that probably you shouldn't because they're secret. It could be your own personal information. It could be if you work at a company, you put in patient information. I guess I can speak to this slide as well. We already talked about false outputs, and I'll get to those in a second. But just in terms of input, you could put in, if you're a software programmer, here is some code I'm writing. Can you fix this or write the next piece of code? Or here is some customer information. Please generate a chart. Well, you may not have permission to use customer information that way. You do not have permission to use patient information that way. To put your software code into the system, what that means is if you're using a consumer LLM, not an enterprise version one, the company like OpenAI, which runs ChatGPT, may say, well, thank you for that information. We're going to train on that now. Then a competitor or some other actor could type in a prompt that says, give me this kind of information, and it answers the question with your data, or maybe your patient data or whatever. So that's one of the risks, is simply what can be put into them. And this is partly a risk because their recent studies show that something like over 70% of companies have people using large language models without the company knowing. So there's risk already being introduced into the organization that the company doesn't know about and they're not training the employees about. Now, a lot of what is on this slide, we've talked a little bit about the lack of customer consent, but a lot of it's on the output level. So once you put a prompt in and it answers the question, right? It could be just false. That's sometimes been called hallucinating, anthropomorphizing it in a way that isn't really correct, but it may be undesirable responses. Maybe it's an insult. Maybe it's defaming, libeling, slandering somebody. There are a number of cases where it did that. Now, how does it do that? Well, it's just completing sentences. So it finds things and it sort of adds the next word. And pretty soon, Professor Turley over at George Washington University has been convicted of sexual assault. It's like, whoa, where did it get that? And we often don't know because they're a black box still. We are looking to get more accountability so that we know how it got its answers. But as of right now, there's very little explainability. And this is particularly why the EU, among other governments, has been trying to limit the use, especially in areas that affect decisions about people, housing, jobs, insurance coverage, access to government benefits, right? If you can't explain the response, and we know that anything trained on human information is going to have human bias, we have to be concerned. Okay, there's a lot of examples of how companies have thought they were doing something amazing and they just baked their own biases right into the product. Years ago, Amazon did this with trying to predict what a great software programmer candidate would look like. And so they fed all of their existing software programmer resumes into the system for training data. And can you imagine what skewing effect that might have had? It wasn't a random sample, right? In fact, it turned out to be a lot of white males who already had those jobs. And so if it saw any evidence that a new resume was a woman, it was like, no, that's not the model, right? So they can be really stupid. And this is where human error comes in. Sometimes deciding where to use the generative AI is the most important decision, because it may not be an intelligent use of it. It may be that the data is biased already. It may be that as you train the data, there's bias that slips in. You may have seen some other issues, uncompensated use, similar to stolen training data. There are a lot of entities now that are suing the large language model companies for training on their copyrighted data. This isn't really covered in the Copyright Act. It's not very clear how that's going to work out, but my guess is that the courts will probably allow that. There are some companies that have gotten into trouble because not only did they train on, say, the New York Times articles, but if you put in a particular prompt, it actually gave out the New York Times article, which is an actual infringement. But this is one of the issues, is just on a societal level. You've got a couple of companies that are training on really the sum of human knowledge and ingenuity, the words that we've used, the ideas, the images, the videos, and they're pulling all that out without any compensation to the people who gave them that idea. And then on the other side, they're competing with those same people for business. Right now, you don't have to hire the graphic designer. Now you don't have to hire the marketing assistant. Now you don't have to hire the first-year legal associate. And I use generative AI for legal research, not GPT. You don't want to use these public models, but there are some good ones that are part of Westlaw or other organizations, and they're really good. Like, they do what I would ask a young associate to do, but it takes 7 minutes, not a week. And I can quickly change the prompt if I don't quite like the answer and get different cases. Now, because of the word completion, you may have heard stories about lawyers who turned in briefs with fake cases. Did any of you see any of that? Yeah, it's a headline grabbing thing, but it's not the AI's fault, right? Everyone thought this was an AI thing. No, it's really a lawyer supervising his or her own work thing. If my summer associate gives me a brief, I still have to look at the cases they cite and what they say the cases are saying before I put them in a brief to a federal judge, right? That's just part of our ethical responsibility. So these are actual headlines. You may have seen some of these. I think this might have been Australia. ChatGPT falsely claimed a mayor went to prison. Why not? If it completes the sentence, put prison there instead of college or something. There was a case in, I think, Hong Kong. A finance worker gets a video call that appears to be his chief financial officer, who says, I need $25 million in the following account as soon as you can. So the employee says, well, that's my boss. In fact, that's my boss's boss's boss. Here you go. Puts the money in the account. It's not the CFO. They're getting more sophisticated too. They can have the CEO do an audio fake, call you from vacation, say, I'm have a really bad connection here, but here's what I need you to do. It's really urgent. Oh, click. Oh, and then you get an email. Hey, got cut off, right? Here's what I want you to do. And it all seems really real. And the timing is amazing. And that's just a very sophisticated phishing expedition, right? PHISHING, that kind of like, we're trying to get your information. We talked a little bit about creatives demanding answers. Sora is the video generation capability of OpenAI. And if you saw that a few months ago, it came out with images or video of woolly mammoths, right? Just marauding across the landscape, looking amazing with these, through the snow-covered landscape. And creatives are like, well, where did you get the idea of what one of these looks like? Because you didn't send somebody to a zoo. You didn't send them to Siberia to capture some video. You use sketches and designs that you found on the internet. You might have used photos of the woolly mammoth in the National Zoo or something that somebody had worked on. But basically, you had your entire idea of what one of these is because of the work of maybe several dozen or 100 different people over the years. So they're saying, do we get any recognition? Do we get any compensation? And right now it's hard because, again, it's unexplainable. The OpenAI can't say, well, we got some of the idea for the woolly mammoth from this guy and some from this person and so forth. And they can't really tell you. We've got a number of incidents of AI customer service bots trashing the company that they're supposedly working for, or even creating contracts. There was a guy recently who convinced the chat bot to sell him a Chevy Tahoe for $1. And the guy was obviously just playing around. He said, no takesies, backsies. And the generative AI said, you're right, no takesies, backsies. You can't take it back. I don't know if that was actually considered binding, but that's the sort of thing that happens. This diagram here really, AI has been compared to fire and its impact on humanity, right? And there's a lot of ways that analogy holds up with what fire did for our species. It helped to co-evolve our species, made us safe from predators, warmed us up, let us live in farther latitudes, sharpened our spears and our arrows and hardened them. Cooked our food, especially protein, which allowed our brains to explode in size and so forth. So really amazing. Also, it can burn down a city or a forest. And so we're wondering, how much is Gen AI like that, right? It has this incredible opportunity that can really, it's probably going to change the way humans even show up in the world and what skills and abilities we have, even our evolution. But it can also do some pretty damaging things. So we were talking about some of the different risks, right? I mentioned this earlier. Ultimately, humans are the risk, right? It's humans that can be part of the data set that it's trained on that has bias in it. Humans will do a lot of the training. A lot of people don't realize there are many people in low-wage countries who stare at screens all day, sometimes at horrific images and videos, and are training the idea, that's a cat, that's a dog, that's a this, and so forth and so on. And they're like labeling everything, gently training these systems. And they can make errors and import their own biases as well. The other issue is just infringing rights. So if I do some output, I could be plagiarizing somebody. I could actually be infringing their copyright. I could be generating something that's untrue about them, and so forth. So this is one of the serious issues. Another thing is there are a lot of companies that don't even want their advertising and marketing contractors to use generative AI at all, because they're worried that it's going to plagiarize somebody else. They're worried it's going to infringe somebody's copyright. And they may also be worried that, and this is something that's important, I think, for people to understand, generative AI produces something that any creative would understand is just a first draft. That's all it is. And it's no first draft is ready to be turned in anywhere, whether it's school, your company, company you work for. The Copyright Office rewards the same thing that we all like when we look at a piece of written work. This has been through iterations and revisions and thoughtfulness. What people need to realize when they use generative AI is that it has done for what a lot of people is the hard part, getting off the blank page, right? And that's amazing. But that now turns us into something that a lot of people don't have experience being, where we've now become editors. How many people have edited other people's work, especially at the junior high or high school level? It turns us into proofreaders. It turns us into fact checkers. And those are the skills we're going to have, just as any creative understands that creativity is iteration. It's refining that idea like a sculpture, adding to and removing, adding to and removing. And the Copyright Office rewards that, because if you hand me something at work and says, here is the next blog article, and you give this to me, and it's what ChatGPT produced, and you didn't change a comma, I've paid you, and you've handed me something that you don't have copyrights to because you didn't create it, and you can't give the copyright to me because you didn't have it in the first place. So now I'm going to put it on our website, and anybody in the world can steal that blog article and use it because we don't have any copyrights in it. So the way you get a copyright, you change, you edit, you edit. And in fact, there'll be tools that do this, I think, in the future, but the way to really be sure, and I would do this if I were a teacher in high school as well, is I'd say, for this assignment, I want to see your first draft from ChatGPT, and I want to see your last draft. And I can even show you how to do a compare between the first and the draft and see the red line, because the red stuff is what you added or subtracted. It's the judgment that you exercised. And the red stuff, if you're in a company, is what you have copyright in. The patent laws work similarly. Patent does not acknowledge a machine as an author capable of generating patents. It's a little different with trademark. This third leg of intellectual property, a trademark doesn't care who created it. So you can ask GPT for a logo, and it can generate one. And if it doesn't infringe anybody else's logo, you can use it. I kept this image here because I must have tried 15 times to get the system to understand the concept of tripping over a brick on the sidewalk. And he was falling backwards. He was kicking the brick. Here, he's still falling backward. There is no brick. There are 3 shoes, and his hand is on backwards. There are a couple other issues, I think, here, but I think his foot's on backwards too. But this is what we're talking about. All right, let's do questions. I've already talked about these. Privacy, a very big issue. Somebody needs to have your permission before they train on your data. We're going to see a lot of issues around that coming up. But and as you see here, this is in trademark law what's called tarnishment. You've got Mickey Mouse smoking a cigarette. If you ask the system to create an Italian plumber, it'll return an image that looks exactly like Super Mario. So there's always copyright issues going on here. Somebody probably generated that by show me a mouse smoking a cigarette, and that's what it does, is it goes to Disney. Anyway, any questions? I guess we'll sit here so we can both answer.
So we just had I work for the judiciary. So we had a meeting on AI. We actually acquired Lexis AI. LexisNexis is it's the database we use for, case law and anybody who works with lawyers or is a lawyer. But in the meeting, the judges want or requested that or want to know if there's a system where we could fact check motions, anything legal that goes through their court. They want to now make sure it's not AI. Is that a thing? Because that's one of the tasks my team was given.
Oh, so you're talking about identifying what has used AI?
Yeah, they want to know how real attorney's brief is when they submit it to the court.
Okay, well that's something they want to know anyway. And there is a newer service called ClearBrief, which actually some judges are using, which pulls up the party's brief and will assess whether the case they cited says what they said it did, and if the parenthetical is accurate, and they can immediately click and go to the page, and they can see if I was a judicial clerk once too, and I had to do this the hard way. But it does help you to determine, is what's being written actually true, but much faster than ever before. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so when I was in school, I was an English major undergrad, and that was in around 2012, 13, something like that. And they had a thing that before this AI had officially come to be, we would have to get all of our references off of JSTOR. It had to be real stuff. But they could like look at our paper, get our paper and run it through something to see if anything was plagiarized. And I was just wondering, is this the same sort of thing that they're using with AI?
Well, it's harder because they're generating entirely new content, or at least they're supposed to, excluding the New York Times issue. It's supposed to be entirely new. So they're predicting a lot of stuff and they're drawing from things. And there are some tools that can start to identify if there's AI involved, but it's an arms race right now. Anything to add?
Is there going to be any regulation coming up or any way to stop people from using AI as a marketing tool? Let me just give you an example. A new company, a new golfing company that builds golf clubs says this is AI technology. So it doesn't matter whether you hit the ball, the driver on the front end or the back end or the middle, it's going to go exactly the same way, and maybe it'll even go faster because it's using AI. I can't believe that because it's impossible, really. So my question is, that's just an example, but my question is there going to be any body that's going to say this you can't use and use AI as a marketing tool that really doesn't work?
Yeah, well, I don't think there'll be a new body. I think there are existing bodies. One of them is the FTC, which governs unfair practices, trade practices, and deceptive trade practices. Also, the golfing companies' competitors can bring a similar kind of claim under the trademark laws. So those will handle that situation. When somebody is making false claims, that's how that'll be handled.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. I'm a chief privacy officer at a Fortune 500 company, and we look very closely at the intersection of how AI is affecting individual privacy rights. But my question is outside of that realm, which is, it seems to me you're going to need a tremendous amount of talent to manage this. And I'd like you to comment on whether or not is there going to be an issue trying to get enough smart people to really ramp up and manage AI, not only at a technical level, but all of the higher level orders of the ethical and responsible uses of AI, and get ahead of it so it doesn't get ahead of us?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a very key point. I am particularly nervous about the next 3 to 5 years because governments are just starting to think about how to regulate AI and the use of AI. Companies are using AI without a lot of controls. And I think Cameron alluded to that, the case of the car dealer, right, that was giving something away. There's another case that came out recently about Air Canada's chatbot, which told someone incorrect information, and Air Canada did not want to give this customer a refund the chatbot said he would get. The customer did win in that case. I think the bigger fear for me is what's going to happen with, say, deep fakes around the next election. We're going to start seeing those all over the place. Scammers are just coming into their own. So, I mentioned GPT and things like that. There are versions of those that have been created for scammers that are on the dark net that basically can give you a toolkit for creating scams and writing code for malicious programs. All of that stuff is happening too. Everything you're seeing on the good side of AI is happening on the dark side of AI. And to your point, the biggest fear I have is the people in government, particularly in the US government right now, who are trying to regulate this, don't understand the technology. So there was an executive order recently that mandated the creation of chief AI officers in the government. I've been looking at who's filling those roles. They are almost exclusively people who have zero technical background whatsoever. And if you don't understand, this is a different technology. If you don't understand what it can do and the nuances, the regulations you write will not prohibit the things you need to prohibit. So I think you're onto something. I don't see a great solution so far.
I'm a college professor, and I deal with a lot of policy briefs. I try to teach students like this one how to write policy briefs and write analytical ones as well. And I prided myself, I thought that I could catch plagiarists and I could find when it came from Chat GPT, but are they going to produce a program that I can't tell? And how do I know what I need to ask for? I think it's a good learning tool because you can look at what you wrote and how it's edited, but can they just at some point do it and I can't tell and they haven't learned?
They already probably have done it and you can't tell in some cases. I mean, there are certainly, as Cameron alluded to earlier, there are certainly companies that are developing technology that attempts to determine if something was written in whole or in part by one of these systems, and it's doing it through, looking for certain patterns that are a function of the underlying technology. But as soon as you develop something that can detect it, someone else can figure out how to circumvent that detection, right? Ultimately, it's going to come down to the creativity that will be a difference in terms of human creativity versus the computer creativity.
I just had an idea. We might want to build this. I think if you train the AI on your students' work, so we get examples of your writing, and then we compare it to what came out, that is a very accurate way of determining authorship. But we would have to start to get all the prior writings of those students to see how their voice and style and vocabulary had changed. Let's build it.
All right. If you two would please come over. Please give our speakers a round of applause. This was a great lesson for us. And thank you for teaching us the legal side as well, because that really, I'm sure if a lot of these young people especially can pick that up, they'll know how they can stay out of trouble. Okay. So we have a tradition here at our club where we present each of our speakers with their own tree. So we will be planting a tree in your honor, and there's a certificate there. Oh, there you go.